We are in week 4 of our 6-part series, Faithful, where we're answering one question. How does trust in Jesus grow? How does trust and how does faith in Jesus grow as we go through our life? And this is where we've been so far. Week 1, we looked at the space of people who follow Jesus have changed our world. And it wasn't because they believed the right things, but because they put it into action. And they followed through on what it is that they believed they were meant to be doing. Then we looked at the first thing that God uses to grow our faith, which is practical teaching. The whole idea that when we be wise, read and apply, our life tends to change. Our faith grows and our world is a better place. When people who love Jesus read about what Jesus was about or learn from the Bible, and then they go and they actually do it. There's nothing worse probably than we've experienced, is when someone says they love Jesus or they want to do the right thing, but then they don't do the right thing. But people who love Jesus and put it into practice, grow wise, they read and apply. Then last week we looked at the second thing that God uses to grow our faith, which is personal ministry. About the idea that your time can change other people's lives. When you take time out of your schedule to serve other people, to care for other people, that has an impact in their life. And when their life changes, it grows your faith because of what you did to serve them. And today we're going to look at what is, in my opinion, probably the most important way that God grows our faith. And it's an area where when we don't have it or it's lacking, it's actually an off-ramp to faith. So what we're looking at today is friendship, about providential relationships. So a quick word about friendships. Friendships are tricky, right? They just are. They're hard. Friendships are difficult. Now, what's fascinating to me is that some friendships, they form over bonds around the deepest things. Some friendships are just like, wow, we connect in this value-driven way. We connect in this way which is so deep and so immersive. And then other friendships are formed, and it's just because you both like the same TV show. Or you happen to both go and play squash at the same time. Or you just so happen to go to the book club at the same time. Or something happens and the friendship can be formed over something that's actually quite trivial. Some friendships are so good that when one party intentionally harms the other party, maybe they gossip, or maybe they lie, or maybe they have a lapse in judgment, some friendships can survive that and come out the other side stronger. Whereas other friendships, just because an offhand comment gets received the wrong way, gone. Isn't that interesting? Friendships are just tricky. And then there's some friendships where they actually end well. And I'm sure for some of you, you've done this well over your life. For some of you, you're like, I've never ended a friendship. We just sort of grew apart. Some friendships, they have the space of mind to be able to look at each other and say, we're just going different directions. It's been good to be a friend with you. We're going to part now. And a lot of friendships are sort of like, oh yeah, I haven't seen them for a while. And you just drift and drift and drift. Friendship is something which is tricky. It's a tricky business. But one thing which we've learnt by experience, or we've been lucky enough to hear, is something around these sort of words. And you may not have used these words before, but if you've got kids, you've probably told them to your kids before, something along this line here. When it comes to friends, your friends determine the direction and the quality of your life. You may not have said it that way, but you've probably communicated that to your children before, or to your friends before, or perhaps you've had to communicate that to a parent before, or to a co-worker before. Because when we are surrounded by people who are going the same direction as us, life goes really well. It's almost like we get a boost in anything that we're doing. But we've also experienced that when we're surrounded by people who act in ways that go against our values and against who we truly are fundamentally as a person, that can be really difficult. And for some of us, we found ourselves in friendship situations where we've made decisions, poor decisions, not because that's who we are, but because of who we were around. And for some of us, we paid the price at some time because of those decisions. And for some of us, unfortunately, even to this day, we're still paying for poor decisions made when surrounded by the wrong type of friends. Friendships are just tricky. They're hard. Now, lucky for us, the author of Hebrews puts pen to paper, and he understands, or she understands, whoever the author was, understands this dynamic of friendship. And they wrote this in Hebrews chapter 10, 23 to 25. Now, the context of the whole book of Hebrews is basically, the author is trying to say, Jesus once and for all has reconciled us to God. And they go and unpack in multiple different ways why Jesus is just the king. Superior in every single way. It's Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. That's the whole intention of the book. And within that context, they drop these lines in, which I think are really important. The author says, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess. For he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds." Let's stop there for a second. The author is recognizing that for us to be reminded of him who is faithful, to be reminded that we are people who are called towards love and good deeds, we need to hold together unswervingly. We need to stay together as a people. Because I will just speak honestly. A lot of our human nature is probably not towards love and good deeds. I mean, our fundamental as humans, we all want the best for people, right? We want the best for humanity. But then someone hurts us. Life's unfair. We didn't get picked for the thing. And suddenly that whole love and good deeds thing starts to go a little bit more out the window. And the what about me thing starts to come into the center. So the author is saying, hang on a second, let's remember who we are as people. And let us together consider how we can encourage one another, spur one another on, remind one another that we are people of love and good deeds. The author goes on, "Not giving up and meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another." Now you may be thinking, great, a sermon around coming to church on Sundays. Because to be honest, that's how this passage has been used. During COVID, it was really fascinating to watch a lot of people react to things that happened when the government said, you got to stay apart, you got to do this, that, and the other, and we complied and did all the things. And a lot of my Facebook feed by some very lovely people who really love God put up this verse saying, "Don't give up meeting together." And their whole thing was basically, this is bad. We can't get together on a Sunday. This is bad. This is not good. I don't think that's really what the author's getting at here. Now, Sunday is an expression of how we gather together, but if you actually go back and look through the early church, how we're meeting right now with this many people in the room is not how they did church. It's the reason why when you read through some of the passages in the New Testament, you go, they had a lot of freedom to do a lot of things, and there's some stuff that Paul talks about when it comes to the order of worship as to how we should do things. And when you try to practice that with a group as large as we are, it sort of breaks down. Tim McBride came, he's the principal at Vos Morling, of Morling College. He came to the Vos campus and he spoke around preaching and some stuff and unpacked some really helpful things. But one thing that Tim observed when he was looking at this passage is it's a passage around how church should operate, where our modern churches just don't operate that way anymore. So people who go back and try to find things in the Bible, this is how the church should be. That's how home churches worked sometimes, and then that changed again in different parts. So I don't think right now they're talking about just Sunday. I don't think they're talking about Sunday morning. What I think the author's talking about here is don't give up meeting together throughout your week. Don't step away from meeting with people who believe what you believe. If you're someone who follows Jesus, we need people around us that can encourage us as we follow Jesus, because it's difficult. So don't give up meeting together. Don't give up gathering. Don't give up encouraging one another. So this is not a message about come to church on Sundays. This is actually a message about friendship. Because what the author is getting at here is around friendship. How do we maintain good friendship with people who lead us to do good things? How do we stay in community with people who love God the way that we love God? And we're going to unpack that right now. So the author of Hebrew weighs in on a very important dynamic when it comes to friendship. And the dynamic that we all know is true, but we don't really think about too often, is this dynamic here. Proximity matters. Proximity matters. How close we are to other people impacts the way that we live. And proximity can be a friendship builder, or it can lead us into sometimes some bad decisions. Consider this for a moment. I found this quite insightful when I read this, and then I thought about it. I went, this is so true. Consider this. Generally, people who have had a faith in the past will drift away from a faith community before they drift away from their faith. People will drift away from the community aspect before they give up their fundamental belief about who God is and what God means to them. A recent study by political scientists Ryan Burge and Paul Dupe showed that most people who leave the church, now this is in America, but he said most people who leave the church aren't angry, aren't bitter, weren't jilted. They just disconnected. Life was happening and something changed in their circumstances. And it wasn't because the church did the wrong thing. It wasn't that they were hurt by someone within the church. It's just that something shifted. They moved house, they moved job, they moved life stage. Maybe they got married, maybe they had kids, maybe they divorced, maybe they lost a child. For whatever it is, life changed and they started to disconnect from their faith community. People disconnect from the community of faith before they personally move on from their own faith. And this may be, in fact, be the story of some of your people in your life. Maybe you have a friend, a spouse, a child, a mum, a dad. You look at their life and you talk to them about why they aren't a part of any church community or why they don't have a faith in God anymore. And it didn't come down to the fact that they stopped believing in God. It's just that they stopped being connected to people. It's almost like they just didn't have any friends there anymore. It's like they weren't connected anymore. They became disconnected somehow, and rather than reconnect, that just didn't happen for whatever reason. And so they left the church. But they may have held on to their faith. But perhaps eventually, because they were so disconnected, they also lost their faith as well. Maybe your story and the way that you came to follow Jesus may actually be the reverse of this. Maybe life changed and you moved into community with people who follow Jesus. Perhaps part of your story is that you started to hang out with some people who are from a church and you went, you know what, they're actually not that weird. Like, they're a bit weird. They believe some funky things. But they're not so weird that I can't connect with them. And then you start to hang out with them. You're like, oh, yeah, they're not bad, you know. But they can believe what they believe. I'm going to believe what I believe. And then after time, maybe your story is that as you started to listen, and as you started to get to know them, as you started to get to see their heart, you started to go, oh, it's not so bad, it's not so weird. And then eventually perhaps you found yourself going, this is actually a faith that I want for me. And maybe that's how you moved into your faith, through friendship, through community. Friendships are the most powerful way that God grows our faith. It is the most powerful way that God grows our faith. We're going to look in a couple of weeks around this idea, actually next week, around situations, circumstances, pivotal circumstances in our lives that can either make our faith or break our faith. And one of the key determining things as to whether a pivotal circumstance, that's when you experience deep loss and grief, change in circumstances that you never saw coming. One of the number one determining factors for how you will respond is your friendship. And who you're friends with, and how your friends interpret what is happening to you. In fact, there's a whole book in the Bible called the Book of Job, which is all about friendship and all about how people are friends. Anyway, you can go read it. It's a good book about one man's journey through loss and friends who sort of get it, and helpful and unhelpful all at once. So friendships, they're the most powerful way that God grows our faith. I believe that again and again. The reason people come to church is friendship. The reason people leave church is friendship, because the lack of friendship can be the biggest off-ramp to faith. It can be the biggest builder and the biggest off-ramp. Now, I've experienced this to be true when I've had conversations with people. Now, as a pastor, when you're talking with someone trying to build a friendship, right? So I like to talk to people. My wife, we'll go to the park or whatever, and I'll be looking out for who's the mum or dad or grandparent who's not on their phone, because they're the ones who want to talk. The ones who are on their phone, leave me alone, right? Don't try and make eye contact with them, because they'll just sort of, what are you doing? But the other people, I look for them and I'm like, hey, let's have a chat. I had a great chat with someone. Ezra, my number 2, was playing cricket, doing the little Woolworths Cricket Blast thing. And I got to have this really great conversation with his dad week after week after week. But what happens in these situations where you build these relationships, as I was talking to this dad at cricket, what happens is you're trying to find common ground. And one of the main ways, especially as guys, but everyone does it, what do you do? Right? What do you do? What do you do for work? Now, I personally try to avoid that question from me answering it as long as I can. I want to build as much relational capital that I can build before I say what I do. Because I know that as soon as I say it, I'm going to get one of 2 responses. Oh, and then they want to share about their faith, or oh, and sometimes oh, and they really don't want to talk to me after that. I've only ever had one time where one person physically went, I don't want to talk to you, and they left. That's only ever happened one time. So obviously there's a lot going on in their story, but that's only ever happened once. But I try and delay as much as possible. Now, I like to ask questions. I like to keep conversation flowing. And what I found is that generally, people who ask more questions of me than I ask of them generally have a faith. I don't know what it is. When I'm talking to someone, I'm trying to ask them as many questions, and I'm trying to get to know them. And I've found that most of the time when people are really trying to get to know me, and the dynamic is shifting, they're asking me questions. Normally when I say I'm a pastor, they go, yeah, and then we chat church, or they tell me about their church journey. But what happens a majority of the time, I try and ask them lots of questions. Then they ask me, well, what do you do for work? I go, I'm a pastor. They will either go, okay, because they understand the language, or they'll go, what's a pastor? They may, through schools, have an idea of pastoral care, or maybe through aged care, or if they've had interaction with a chaplain before, may have a vague idea. So normally I have to go to my second way of trying to describe who I am. Like Catholics, like a priest. Oh, a priest! Oh, we know a priest. So then I'm like, yeah, like a priest, but I'm not a priest. Anyway, they get it at that point. If they engage with me further once I mention I work at a church, a lot of the time, when I'm talking to people, they'll say, I used to go to church. And my favorite follow-up question to that is, what happened? Why aren't you at church anymore? Just ask them. I've very rarely had a bad experience where they have, a couple of times I've heard stories where I'm like, I understand why you don't go to church. That's awful. I'm so sorry. But a majority of the time, when I ask them, well, what happened? Why aren't you in church anymore? A majority of the time, it's the same thing. I got busy. I moved house, I moved life stage, I moved careers, and I just never reconnected with a church. It wasn't because they were hurt. Most of the time, it's them just saying, look, my life just changed course, and I wasn't connected with the people there anymore. And when I wasn't connected with the people anymore, I didn't go back there. And then I realized that my Sunday mornings, I can do a lot of things on Sunday morning, so I got busy. People tend to lose faith when they lose that contact with a faith community. Most people who have no faith anymore, generally it comes back to they just lost touch with people who love God. And once they lost touch with people who love God, they started to see their faith go as well. So how does Jesus grow our faith? Providential relationships. Now, the word providential means that it can't be forced. Providential is all about the idea that when people talk about their faith story, recount their faith story, a lot of the time, part of a faith story will be a moment where they say, and then that person came into my life. I was living this way, and then that person became my friend. I was going along, and I rocked up to church one day, and then that person came and said hello to me. I was living my life, and my friend came up, and they were that person who came to me and said, hey, do you want to come and hang out with me in a church context? So providential means you can't force it. It means it happens. It means that when you look at it in hindsight, that it was God's timing at God's moment to bring God's person into your life. But at some point in time, in every faith story I've heard, they point back to 1, 2, or 3 people and they go, because of them, because of that person, I have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Because when we see the faith of another person, when we see God's faithfulness in the life of another person, it gives us permission to believe. It gives us courage to believe. It's easier to trust God with our life when we can see in other people's life that He is trustworthy. So staying connected to community of faith will grow our faith. And there's a very simple way that this happens. Now, I want to talk about evangelism for a second, because friendship and evangelism, in my mind, can't be removed. There are people on this earth who they are just evangelists, and they will walk down the street, they'll have a conversation with someone, that person's in tears, giving their life to Jesus. I'm like, how do you do that? They go, I just asked them if they want to know Jesus, and it was the right time. That's awesome. They're so cool. They can do that. That's their gifting. Love it. But for a majority of us, for a majority of us, the way that evangelism happens is one-to-one friendships and relationships. So let me just talk about evangelism for a second. Evangelism is simple. It is spreading the good news that Jesus died and rose again, and that the God who created everything wants to have a friendship with everybody. That's all it is. It's not more complicated than that. So evangelism, or when we talk about evangelism, it means bringing the good news to people. So in church circles, when we talk about evangelism, it's sort of like a shortcut word to say, how do you share your faith with other people? If you're from outside the church or you have no church background, it's just a word to capture the fact that we believe that God has made our life better by knowing Jesus, and we want to share that. Now, we don't want to be forceful with that. And unfortunately, there are some people who experience people who are very passionate and maybe a little bit misplaced in their passion. And you can get stopped by people. I was walking in Mandurah one time with Marnell, and this person came up and tried to convert us, and I'm trying to explain to them, I love Jesus. And they're like, but you don't love Jesus enough. And I'm like, I love Jesus, bro. I don't know what to say to you. And he's trying to convert me on Mandurah foreshore. Like, I'm like, he's basically saying, do you love the right Jesus? I'm like, I'm pretty sure. Anyway. I don't know, maybe down. Maybe I need to go back to Mandurah and find that brother. Anyway, evangelism was one of the things that's been charged to the church. When Jesus left, he said, go make disciples, go and tell people the good news and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now the problem is that for some of us, with our baggage of Christianity, evangelism has become this idea that if I know enough, or if I've done the right course, then I can do evangelism. The problem is that you don't really do evangelism. You are someone who gets to share good news. You are an evangelist. One of the things when we follow Jesus is that we've all been given a new life, a new opportunity, a new faith, and we can share that with other people. If your life has changed for the best, why wouldn't you want to share that with other people? Some of us are more happy to go and tell people about a new deal we got on this subscription or a new car we bought than we are to tell people about the fact that Jesus has made a difference in our lives. Here's the thing. Let me give you the one question which will make evangelism about 100 times easier. You don't need to go on a 10-week course. You don't need to be a professional of the Bible. You don't need to have been a Christian for 1 decade before you got your You Can Tell People About Jesus card. Let me give you the one question which anybody can ask and which will be the gateway for you to be able to share your faith. It's just come sit with me. That's it. Come and sit with me. It's so simple. Jesus did it again and again and again. He just went around. Now, Jesus was bold. All right, now, contextually, people at the time respected Jesus and they wanted him in his house. But Jesus, he invited him. He wasn't like, come sit with me. He's like, I'm going to go sit with you and you're going to feed me. Jesus was very, very on it. Now, come sit with me is an invitation. A simple question for someone to come and experience what you are experiencing. So what that means is that if you love Jesus, you don't need to go to someone and convince them that Jesus is worth following. That's not your job. You cannot convince someone. If we could convince someone that Jesus was worth following every week, we'd just do that again and again and again and let people go, wow, he's worth following. That's not how it works. You can't convince someone. But you can form a friendship which could become the vehicle where Jesus can come into their life. And it starts with this simple invitation. Why don't you just come and sit with me? Hey, I'm going to church on Sunday. Do you want to come and sit with me? Hey, I'm having a meal next Friday night and a couple of people are coming around to have a chat. Do you want to come and sit with me? Hey, next Sunday, we're going to go and hang out over here. I just want to know, do you want to come and hang with us? Do you want to come sit with me? It is the easiest question to ask physically, but one of the most difficult. Because what you're asking is, do you want to come and be my friend? Maybe we could have friendship. Come and be in proximity with me. Come and experience what I experience. Come and share life with me. Come into friendship with me. You can't make a providential relationship happen. It's providential. It's God's business. But you can open the door for it to become a reality. And I believe that this one sentence is the one thing that the church misses when it comes to how we can be the best followers of Jesus. A lot of people in church go, if we have the best music, it'll work. If we have the best speaker, it'll work. If we do a church rally, a tent ministry, a bus ministry, if we focus on overseas missions, if we focus here, there, if we have better tech. A lot of times church people, they get so into church world that we think the best way to reach people is to get these professionals and make it happen or upgrade our facilities. And we look out when a lot of the time I think Jesus is actually wanting us to look in. Because the best way that we can be the church to our community here in the city of Kalamunda is to invite people into friendship. Because it's through friendship that faith grows. It's proximity that builds ways for God to interact with that person. And you may not have all the right words, and you may not have it all together. In fact, God tends to make the people who are the most broken become the best people to reach people. Normally it's those of us who have it together that it's a hindrance. But if we will just trust Jesus and ask the question to invite people to come into a friendship with us, we've given God a chance to show them what life with Jesus looks like. And that is the most powerful thing. That is the most powerful thing that we can do as followers of Jesus. The author of Hebrews said, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess." Let's be people who are hopeful. For he, that's Jesus, who promised is faithful. And let us consider to spur one another on, not giving up meeting together, but encouraging one another. What would it look like to be a church that put our faith and our trust in the fact that it is friendships that will win the day? And we become the people that become inviters to see what God can do. And when we invite people to come into friendship and relationship with us, and we see God do something in their life as they see God do it in ours, that grows our faith. A single invitation can position you to be a catalyst in someone else's faith story. Because when we see God's faithfulness in the life of another person, it's so much easier to trust him with ours. So, it's your turn. There's a slide here with two things that I want to just ask you to consider for a second. If you love Jesus and you're like, yep, I'm sold out, love him, have loved him for 10 minutes or 10 years or whatever, would you consider asking this question of someone over the coming weeks? Worst thing they can do is laugh at you. No, the worst thing they can do is say no. When I've said this invitation, I've never had someone laugh at me yet. It will happen one day. It hasn't happened yet. I've had a lot of no's. Oh, no, it's not working right now. And a lot of times, because I'm asking people with families normally, they're like, oh, I'll go talk to my spouse. And they never get back to you at that point. Anyway, will you consider asking? Worst thing they can do is say is no. And you've cost yourself maybe a little bit of embarrassment, but that is at most what it's cost you. If you follow Jesus and this is not a question that you have had the opportunity to ask in the last 6 to 12 months, I've got to ask you, join us on the Great Commission and be a person that asks that question. It's not your responsibility to get them to believe. And there's a lot of pressure in this space. I get it. What happens if I don't know the answers? You probably don't, and that's fine. You haven't lived the life they've lived. But if you can just be friends and invite them into spaces where they can experience God, then let God do it. It's not on you. There's no pressure on you. You're not going to get to heaven and God say, you said the wrong words and you didn't do enough. He's probably going to say, I had so many friendships for you to explore and you just didn't do it. You're too busy with other stuff. So if you love Jesus, you haven't asked this question in the last 6 to 12 months, would you consider making it part of your practice? Be a Christian, be a Jesus follower on mission and ask, will you come sit with me? Will you come into friendship with me? Will you come and hang out on a Sunday morning? Will you come and hang out with some people who want to talk about Jesus? Would you consider that? Or if you're someone who's disconnected from faith, maybe you've disconnected from the church, maybe you've come back after a while, would you consider checking it out? Maybe you've already taken that step and that's the reason you're here today. That's great. Hopefully you've enjoyed the music and afterwards you enjoy some great conversation and hopefully this is motivational or something. But would you consider checking out the space? Would you be willing to answer the question and sit with someone who loves Jesus? Jesus began the most important 3 years of his life by asking a question: come, follow me. And it's the question that captivated those 12 men. It's the question that has captivated generations when we follow Jesus. And the way that we partner with him in that is we say, will you come and sit with me? Will you come and be in friendship with me? Our world doesn't need more Christians who believe the right thing. We need people who love Jesus with enough space in their life for friendship. When we're at Pastor's Retreat, which is when all the Baptists in Western Australia, there's about 100 and something Baptist churches, we all come together and we get to hang out and we listen to some content, and it's great. I really love it. The keynote speaker this year was Stephen McCready from Riverview Church, and he talked about this idea of friendship and the gospel as friendship, the good news as friendship. And I'm going to butcher his main point, but let me try and give it to you in a couple of sentences. He was basically saying that the good news of God, the good news of Jesus, is that he wants friendship with us. And through the whole Bible, it's God and humanity entering into friendship again and again and again. And when Jesus said, come and follow me, it was an invitation into friendship. And all these years later, for all of us who say we love Jesus, when we recognize him as King of Kings, we didn't start there. Remember, when the disciples started following Jesus, they weren't even Christians yet. They were just Jewish people who were following Jesus. It was only when they recognized he is the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, he is in control of it all. That's when they became Jesus followers, like Christians, properly. They didn't start there. They started with friendship. They started with food. They started with proximity. They started with laughter. They started with sharing. It started with an invitation. Come, follow me. And an invitation we get to ask other people, come and sit with me. Come and experience what I have experienced. And then let God do what God does. We're not responsible for the result. But I do believe that we are in charge of creating an opportunity for the question. So how does our trust in Jesus grow? 3 ways that we've looked at so far. Practical teaching. Be wise. Read and apply. Personal ministry. Making time changes lives. Your time can change the lives of other people. Once you start doing that, it's addictive. It's fun to be able to make time for other people. And then finally, providential relationships. It just starts with an invitation. You can't force it to become providential. But I guarantee you, you can kill it by not asking the question. If you don't even give Jesus a chance, nothing happens. But if you give him a chance, maybe something can happen. So would you join me being part of this church? If you love Jesus, would you join me in being bold enough and willing to ask the question? Come sit with me. Come and share friendship with me. And then let God do the rest. Let's pray. Hey God, thank you so much for your word. Thank you that in Hebrews you are showing us that you are the one in charge of everything, and you make it so clear that part of you being in charge is that we need to have friendship with one another to remind each other of that fact, so that we do respond in love and good deeds, that we do follow you. I pray right now, God, that we will look for opportunities to ask the question. We will join you in the Great Commission to make disciples, not because we can answer every question, not because we've got it all together, but because we can ask the simple question, hey, come and sit with me. Come into friendship with me. And then we just hand it over to you and see you do what only you can do. So give us boldness to ask and wisdom to ask it well. In your name and for your glory. Amen.